King's Guard's end-of-day parade everyone's talking about. Soldiers moved with careful precision, their boots clicking against the cobblestones, echoing through the empty spaces between the towering walls. Among these disciplined men was Sergeant Elias, a tall man with a steady gaze and a calm demeanor that made him both respected and feared by the younger guards. Today, like every day, he had been overseeing the final drills before the end-of-day routine. But today felt different, though he could not immediately put his finger on why. The young guards, fresh from training and eager to prove themselves, were restless. They whispered quietly among themselves, glancing toward Elias as he observed them. "Did you hear about the King's special parade today?" one of them asked in a hushed voice, trying not to draw the sergeant's attention. "Yes," another whispered back, eyes wide with excitement. "I heard it's going to be unlike anything we've ever done before. The King has been planning it for months. They say it's going to be something the whole town will talk about for years." Elias merely nodded, hiding his curiosity behind a neutral expression. He had been a guard for over 15 years and had seen countless parades, ceremonies, and celebrations, but there was a tension in the air that he could sense. Even the way the younger guards held themselves, unusually straight and cautious, suggested something significant was coming. The courtyard itself seemed to be alive with energy. The guards adjusted their uniforms, polished their armor, and cleaned their weapons with meticulous care. Some carried long spears, their tips catching the last rays of the sun and reflecting them like tiny beams of light. Others held shields, their surfaces shining from hours of careful cleaning. Horses snorted and stamped their hooves in the stables nearby, adding a rhythmic sound to the courtyard's atmosphere. Even the wind seemed to hum, passing through the towers and creating a soft, eerie whistle. Elias walked among the guards, his eyes scanning every detail. He checked the alignment of their formations, the shine on their boots and the grip on their weapons. Despite the whispers of excitement, he wanted everything to be perfect. Discipline was his responsibility, and a single mistake could tarnish the reputation of the King's Guards, something Elias would never allow. As he walked, he noticed a few of the youngest guards struggling to hold their spears upright. He approached them silently, his shadow falling over their small, nervous faces. "Keep your arms straight and steady," he said gently but firmly. "Your spear is an extension of yourself. Treat it with respect." They nodded quickly, adjusting their posture. One of them, barely more than a boy, whispered, "Sergeant, do you think it's really going to be different this time? Will everyone be talking about it?" Elias gave a small, knowing smile. "If the King wants it to be remembered, then yes. But remember this, our job isn't just to march or look impressive. It's to be ready, steady, and disciplined. That is what people will remember about the guards, not the fireworks or fanfare." Despite his words, Elias felt a small twinge of anticipation. He had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone in the castle had. There was talk of a special formation, of ceremonial horses riding through the courtyard, and even of a surprise performance that no one would see coming. For once, the guards weren't just another part of the backdrop. They were going to be at the center of something remarkable. The young guards continued their drills, some stumbling slightly, others moving with unexpected precision. Elias watched them carefully. He had trained many of them personally and could see the blend of fear, excitement, and pride in their eyes. They wanted to impress the sergeant, but more than that, they wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, the castle staff hurried to complete their tasks before the evening. Servants carried baskets of lanterns, setting them along the walls and pathways. The light would soon illuminate the courtyard, making the guards' uniforms gleam even brighter. Blacksmiths hurried to finish polishing ceremonial weapons, while stable hands groomed the horses, brushing their coats until they shone in the fading sunlight. Every detail mattered, and Elias appreciated the quiet dedication of the staff. Without them, no parade, no matter how grand, could succeed. As the minutes passed, the courtyard grew quieter, the sound of the sun lowering in the sky giving way to the soft rustle of banners hanging from the castle walls. The guards stopped their drills and formed neat lines, standing at attention. Elias walked along the front row, checking each soldier's posture. His eyes were sharp, his attention to detail unyielding. Even the youngest guards, nervous and excited, looked proud and ready. For a brief moment, the sergeant allowed himself to imagine the scene that would soon unfold. The townspeople gathering outside the castle gates, their faces lighting up at the sight of the perfectly synchronized guards. Children pointing and laughing, merchants clapping in admiration, visitors from distant lands watching in awe. It was a rare moment when the guards were more than protectors. They were performers, a symbol of order, strength, and unity. Elia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a horn echoing through the castle gates. The captain appeared at the top of the staircase, signaling that it was almost time. The guards straightened even more, their shadows stretching across the courtyard as the light dimmed. The anticipation was tangible, an almost electric feeling in the air. The young guards shifted nervously, glancing at one another. Even the most experienced soldiers, those who had participated in dozens of ceremonies, seemed to feel a thrill of something extraordinary about to happen. "Remember your training," Elias whispered to himself, though loud enough for the nearest guard to hear. "Discipline, focus, pride, nothing else matters." Then a soft cheer came from the main gate. The townspeople were arriving earlier than expected, drawn by curiosity and excitement. Their murmurs and laughter filled the courtyard with a lively sound, bouncing off the stone walls and reaching even the topmost towers. Elias could see their faces through the open gates, shining with expectation. The parade was about to begin, and though nothing had yet happened, the energy of the moment already felt historic. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day, the years of experience, and the responsibility of guiding the guards in front of him. He knew that when the parade began, every movement, every step, every salute would be remembered. And in that quiet moment, before the first foot struck the cobblestones in formal rhythm, he felt something rare, a thrill of excitement that even a seasoned guard could not deny. The sun continued its slow descent, the golden light bathing the courtyard in warmth. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the polished armor and gleaming weapons. Birds settled into the towers, chirping their final songs of the day. The guards, standing at attention, were ready, but the air itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for the extraordinary event that was about to unfold. Even as Elias walked to his position at the front, adjusting the stance of the nearest young guards, he could not help but notice the subtle smiles forming on their faces. Nervousness mixed with pride, fear with anticipation. He had been here for years, training soldiers, leading parades, and keeping watch. Yet today, in this golden hour before the end-of-day ceremony, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that this parade, unlike any other, would be remembered. Not just for the king, not just for the guards, but for the people who came to witness it, for the young soldiers who would tell stories of it for years, and for Elias himself, who would carry the memory of this golden evening in his heart forever. As the first lanterns were lit, casting a soft glow over the polished stones, Elias knew the moment had arrived. The king's guards, disciplined, proud, and steady, were ready to step into history, one measured step at a time. As the golden light of the setting sun faded into a soft, amber glow, the first murmurs of the crowd outside the castle gates grew louder. The townspeople had arrived earlier than anyone expected, their curiosity buzzing like a hive of bees. Children pressed their faces against the gates, their eyes wide with excitement, while merchants adjusted their stalls, eager to sell snacks, trinkets, and souvenirs to anyone who came to watch. Visitors from nearby towns whispered to one another, pointing at the castle walls, and the guards lined up in their shining armor. Inside the courtyard, the tension among the guards was palpable. The younger soldiers fidgeted, shifting their weight from one foot to the other, while the older, experienced men stood like statues, their expressions calm and steady. Sergeant Elias walked along the front row, his eyes scanning each face. He noticed the nervous glances, the slight tremors of anticipation, and the way their hands gripped their weapons just a little tighter than necessary. He did not scold them. Instead, he offered small nods of encouragement, letting them know that he understood their excitement. The captain appeared on the balcony above, signaling for the guards to begin the end-of-day parade. A hush fell over the courtyard. The only sounds were the soft rustling of banners in the evening breeze, the occasional clatter of horses in the stables, and the excited chatter from outside the gates. Elias felt his heart beat a little faster. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment that would be remembered long after the sun had set. The guards lifted their heads and adjusted their stance. Spears were held high, shields polished to a mirror-like shine, and armor gleamed in the soft light. Each man knew his role perfectly. Every step, every turn, every salute had been practiced countless times. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it was not just about precision, it was about creating a memory for the entire town. From the gates, the crowd began to cheer softly, building in volume as they saw the guards in formation. Children waved small flags, merchants clapped their hands, and even the visiting diplomats exchanged impressed glances. Elias noticed the mix of anticipation and admiration on the faces of the crowd. He realized that this parade was more than just a ceremony. It was a connection between the castle and the people it protected. The guards were not just soldiers, they were symbols of pride and stability. As the parade began, the guards marched forward with perfect synchronization. Their boots struck the cobblestones in rhythmic precision, echoing through the courtyard like the beating of a drum. Elias watched with a mix of pride and relief. Every guard was performing flawlessly, their training evident in every movement. The younger soldiers, who had been so nervous moments ago, now held themselves with confidence, their faces set in determined expressions. Suddenly, the crowd gasped as a group of ceremonial horsemen entered the courtyard. The horses were majestic, their coats shining and well-groomed, their hooves clicking in perfect rhythm with the marching guards. The horsemen carried banners that fluttered in the breeze, adding color and movement to the scene. Elias felt a surge of pride. The parade was unfolding exactly as the king had envisioned, and the guards were at the center of it all. The sound of trumpets filled the air, announcing the arrival of the king himself. He appeared on the balcony, dressed in regal attire, his eyes scanning the courtyard with a proud smile. The crowd erupted in cheers, waving and shouting greetings. Elias stood at attention, his heart swelling with pride. He had served the king for many years, and moments like this reminded him why he had dedicated his life to the service of the castle. The parade continued with a series of precise movements and formations. Guards turned in perfect unison, spears raised high and then lowered with exact timing. Horses weaved through the ranks, guided by skilled riders who moved with grace and control. Every detail had been planned, every movement rehearsed, yet there was a natural energy to the performance that made it feel alive. The crowd watched in awe, their applause growing louder with each passing moment. Elias could see the joy on the faces of the young guards. They were learning that discipline and practice could create something beautiful, something that brought happiness to others. For them, this parade was more than a routine ceremony. It was a lesson in pride, responsibility, and the importance of teamwork. Every soldier, from the newest recruit to the seasoned veterans, was contributing to a shared accomplishment, and the result was breathtaking. Among the crowd, a group of children pointed excitedly at a particular maneuver. "Look, they are moving like one body," one exclaimed. Their parents smiled, nodding in agreement. Merchants paused in their work to watch, impressed by the precision and beauty of the parade. Even the visiting diplomats seemed momentarily captivated, their usual formal expressions softening into genuine admiration. Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what he had hoped for, not just perfection in execution, but an emotional connection between the guards and the people they served. As the parade progressed, whispers spread through the crowd about a special surprise that was yet to come. Rumors flew. Some said there would be fireworks, others believed a special guest would appear, while a few thought the king might perform a personal salute to the guards. Elias, however, focused only on the performance at hand. He knew that any surprise, no matter how grand, could only succeed if the guards remained disciplined and composed. The younger soldiers began to notice a change in the atmosphere. The excitement in the crowd grew more intense, and the guards themselves could feel it. It was as if the courtyard had transformed into a stage, and everyone present, soldiers and spectators alike, was part of a shared experience. Elias looked around and saw smiles, nervous laughter, and wide-eyed amazement. Even the oldest veterans, usually reserved and serious, could not hide their enjoyment. Then came a moment that would be remembered forever. From the far side of the courtyard, a group of musicians appeared, carrying drums, flutes, and trumpets. Their music began to fill the air, blending perfectly with the sound of marching boots and clattering hooves. The guards adjusted their timing slightly to match the rhythm, creating a performance that was both disciplined and lively. Elias felt a thrill run through him. The combination of sound, movement, and light made the courtyard seem magical. The crowd's cheers grew louder with each passing moment, and Elias could see the pride on every guard's face. Even the youngest soldiers, who had been nervous at the start, now stood taller, their confidence shining through. They were part of something bigger than themselves, something that would be remembered long after the sun had set. The sense of unity was overwhelming. Guards, musicians, and horses moved together as one, creating a harmony that left the spectators breathless. As the parade reached its midpoint, the whispers of anticipation in the crowd became more focused. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the final, unforgettable moment. Elias sensed the tension among the young guards, who were eager but unsure of what was coming next. He offered a few words of quiet encouragement, reminding them to stay focused, to trust their training, and to enjoy the experience. Suddenly, a soft drumbeat echoed from the back of the courtyard, and all eyes turned toward it. The horsemen shifted formation, creating a path for a special display. The young guards watched in awe as the lead horseman raised a banner high into the air, signaling the beginning of the most impressive maneuver of the evening. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound echoing off the castle walls and filling the courtyard with energy. Elias felt a surge of pride. This was more than a parade. It was a story being told through movement, music, and discipline. Every guard, every horse, every note of music contributed to the narrative. The people watching were not merely spectators, they were participants, sharing in a moment of beauty and unity. Elias realized that this was why they trained so hard, why they followed strict rules, and why they devoted themselves to the king's service. Moments like this made it all worthwhile. As the sun finally disappeared behind the castle walls, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow across the courtyard. Shadows danced along the stone walls, adding depth and drama to the performance. The guards continued their movements, their precision unwavering even as darkness fell. The crowd was mesmerized, unable to look away, caught up in the magic of the evening. Elias looked around one last time as the parade moved toward its climax. He saw young soldiers beaming with pride, musicians playing with perfect timing, and horses moving with elegance. Most importantly, he saw the crowd, families, merchants, visitors, and diplomats alike, watching with wide eyes and smiling faces. In that moment, he understood the true power of what they were doing. It was not just about discipline, precision, or tradition. It was about creating a memory, a shared experience that would be remembered for years. When the parade finally paused, the guards stood at attention, catching their breath, while the crowd erupted into applause. The young soldiers looked at one another, amazed that they had been part of something so extraordinary. Elias allowed himself a small smile, proud of what they had accomplished together. The evening was far from over, but the first part of the parade had already left a lasting impression. For the people of the town, for the young guards, and for Elias himself, this was a night that would never be forgotten. The courtyard had become more than stone and cobblestones. It had become a stage for courage, discipline, and shared pride. And as the king watched from above, smiling down at his guards and his people, it was clear that this parade was only the beginning of a story everyone would be talking about for a long time. The courtyard was now bathed in the soft glow of hundreds of lanterns. Shadows danced across the stone walls, flickering and stretching like living things. The young guards, who had been nervous at first, now stood taller, their faces alive with pride. The crowd's excitement had grown to a cheerful roar, as if the energy itself were a living force sweeping through the castle grounds. Sergeant Elias at the front could feel it too, a mix of anticipation, pride, and something almost magical in the air. From the far end of the courtyard, the ceremonial horsemen began their slow advance. Their hooves clicked with a steady rhythm, striking the cobblestones in a way that matched the guards' synchronized march. Each rider sat tall, perfectly poised, their armor glinting in the lantern light. Elias watched closely as the formations shifted seamlessly, each guard and horse moving with precision as if guided by some invisible conductor. Even the youngest soldiers, who had trembled with nerves at the start, now moved like seasoned performers, their confidence growing with each measured step. The crowd leaned closer to the gates, eyes wide, whispers of admiration and surprise passing among them. "Look at their coordination," a woman exclaimed, pointing toward the young guards. "It's like they've been dancing together for years." A merchant nodded beside her, barely able to hide his excitement. Even the visiting diplomats, who were used to formal events and polished displays, seemed captivated. Their usual reserved expressions softened into genuine smiles. Then a new sound entered the courtyard, a sharp, clear trumpet call followed by a drumbeat that seemed to echo from every corner of the castle. The music carried a sense of anticipation, a signal that something extraordinary was about to happen. The young guards stiffened slightly, focusing on their positions, while the older soldiers exchanged knowing glances. Elias felt a thrill run through him. This was the part of the parade that everyone would remember, the unexpected, the grand, the unforgettable moment. From behind a tall gate, a group of musicians stepped into view. Drums, flutes, and trumpets filled the air with rich, vibrant music. The guards adjusted their rhythm to match, creating a seamless combination of movement and sound. Horses shifted, riders guiding them with subtle gestures, weaving among the soldiers without missing a single beat. The effect was mesmerizing. Elias could feel the pride swelling in his chest. All their training, all their discipline, had led to this precise, breathtaking moment. The crowd gasped as the horsemen formed a large circle in the center of the courtyard. The young guards followed suit, creating an intricate pattern that seemed almost impossible to execute. Yet every movement was perfect, every step timed with exact precision. The lanterns illuminated their polished armor, reflecting light in a dazzling display. Children pointed and laughed, delighted by the spectacle, while adults clapped enthusiastically, cheering and waving. Even the king, watching from the balcony, leaned forward, his expression one of genuine admiration. Elias noticed one of the youngest soldiers, barely 16, whose hands were shaking slightly as he held his spear. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in the grandeur of the parade, the crowd, and the music. Elias placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Keep your focus," he said quietly. "Trust your training and everything will fall into place." The boy nodded, taking a deep breath, and then straightened his posture. The confidence that had been absent at the start of the evening was returning, shining in the young soldier's eyes. The drumbeat grew louder, more urgent, and the horsemen began a series of elaborate maneuvers. Horses pranced and turned in unison, their riders guiding them with subtle signals. The guards mirrored these movements, shifting and turning as if the courtyard itself were a living organism. The combination of music, motion, and lantern light created a mesmerizing performance, holding the audience spellbound. Elias could hear the gasps, whispers, and applause from the crowd, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his team was executing everything perfectly. From the corner of his eye, Elias noticed a small group of children who had sneaked past the first line of spectators. They stood close to the edge of the courtyard, their eyes wide with amazement. One whispered, "It's like magic. Look at them all move together." Elias allowed himself a small smile. Moments like this were why he had spent so many years training young soldiers. It wasn't just about discipline or skill. It was about inspiring wonder and pride in everyone who watched. The parade's complexity increased with each passing moment. Guards formed intricate patterns, horses weaved through the ranks, and musicians played with increasing energy. The young soldiers, who had been so unsure at the beginning of the evening, now moved with confidence and precision. Their faces glowed under the lantern light, and even when mistakes were made, slight missteps or timing that was just a fraction off, they corrected themselves instantly, demonstrating the discipline that Sergeant Elias had instilled in them. As the performance continued, the crowd became more animated. Cheers rose and fell like waves, echoing off the stone walls and filling the castle grounds with vibrant energy. Elias could see the pride on the faces of the guards, from the youngest recruit to the seasoned veterans. Everyone was giving their best, not for reward or recognition, but for the shared experience, for the joy of participating in something extraordinary. Then, without warning, a sudden shift occurred in the parade. The horsemen and guards parted slightly, creating a path in the center of the courtyard. All eyes turned toward the opening, wondering what would come next. The drumbeat slowed, replaced by a series of high, clear trumpet notes that carried a sense of suspense. Elias felt a chill of anticipation run down his spine. This was it, the part of the performance that everyone would remember. A single horse emerged from the shadows, its coat gleaming like polished bronze under the lantern light. On its back sat a rider dressed in ceremonial armor, carrying a banner adorned with the king's crest. The crowd erupted in cheers, gasps, and applause. Children pointed excitedly, merchants clapped with wide smiles, and even the visiting diplomats seemed momentarily speechless. Elias watched with pride, knowing that every guard had played a role in bringing this moment to life. The rider circled the courtyard slowly, the banner waving proudly in the evening breeze. The guards followed, keeping perfect formation as the music swelled, reaching a crescendo that seemed to resonate in every stone of the castle walls. Elias could feel the energy of the crowd, the horses, and the soldiers merging into a single, powerful force. It was a moment of pure harmony, a celebration of skill, dedication, and unity. As the rider completed the final circle, a soft, golden light illuminated the courtyard from hidden lanterns, creating an almost magical glow. The young guards glanced at one another, eyes shining with pride and awe. They had been part of something far greater than themselves, and the experience had left a lasting impression on every heart present. Elias, standing at the front, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had trained these young soldiers, guided them, and watched them grow into confident performers capable of creating a memory that would last a lifetime. The king, still watching from the balcony, clapped his hands slowly, signaling his approval. The crowd responded with thunderous applause, cheering for the guards, the horsemen, and the musicians. Elias allowed himself a small, proud smile. The parade had not only showcased the discipline and skill of the king's guards, but had also strengthened the connection between the castle and the people. It was a shared moment of pride, a memory that would be retold for years to come. The young soldiers exchanged glances, laughter, and quiet congratulations. Even those who had been most nervous at the beginning of the evening now stood taller, their confidence solidified by the successful performance. Elias walked among them, offering words of praise and encouragement. "You did well," he said, his voice calm but warm. "Remember this feeling. This is what it means to serve with pride, to work together, and to create something meaningful." As the music slowed and the final formations came to a halt, the crowd continued to cheer. Lanterns flickered, casting gentle shadows that danced across the courtyard. The young soldiers stood at attention, breathing heavily but smiling with satisfaction. Elias took a moment to look around, taking in the scene, the gleaming armor, the polished weapons, the proud faces, and the captivated audience. He knew that this parade was more than a display. It was a story, told through motion, sound, and unity. Finally, the drumbeat faded, the last trumpet notes echoed softly, and the courtyard fell into a hushed reverence. The king raised his hand, signaling the end of this part of the parade. The crowd erupted once more, clapping, cheering, and shouting their admiration. The young soldiers, though tired, felt a surge of pride. They had done something extraordinary, something that would be remembered. Elias felt the same pride, mixed with relief and joy. Every step, every movement, every moment had been worth it. For the people of the town, for the guards, and for the king himself, this was a night to remember. The courtyard had transformed into a stage of courage, precision, and unity. And as the lanterns flickered, and the last notes of music faded into the evening air, Elias realized that this parade was only growing in importance. The extraordinary part of the evening had just begun, and the story was far from over. The lanterns flickered gently, casting a warm, golden glow across the courtyard. A soft breeze carried the mingled sounds of whispered conversations, excited laughter, and the faint rustle of banners. The young guards, still standing in precise formation, exchanged glances filled with anticipation. They had performed flawlessly so far, and now everyone was waiting for the most unforgettable part of the parade, the surprise the king had promised. Sergeant Elias felt a tingle of excitement run down his spine. He had been part of countless ceremonies before, but something told him that tonight would be unlike any other. The king leaned over the balcony, scanning the crowd with a proud smile. He was no stranger to grand parades, yet the energy in the courtyard seemed to make him genuinely happy. He gave a subtle nod to the captain, signaling that the next part of the ceremony could begin. At once, a hush fell over the spectators, a quiet tension that made the moment feel sacred. The crowd leaned closer to the gates, children perched on tiptoe and merchants holding their hands over their mouths in wonder. Even the visiting diplomats appeared captivated, their formal expressions replaced by smiles of genuine admiration. From the far end of the courtyard, a new group began to emerge. They were dancers, dressed in flowing garments that shimmered in the lantern light. Each step they took seemed to float, their movements perfectly synchronized with a soft, melodic tune played by hidden musicians. The dancers moved gracefully among the horsemen and guards, weaving intricate patterns that added color and life to the display. Elias watched with fascination, impressed by the elegance of the performance. The young soldiers, too, were captivated, momentarily forgetting the weight of their armor and the discipline required for their formation. The crowd gasped as the dancers performed a series of elegant spins and jumps, their silk robes catching the light and creating a cascade of colors across the courtyard. Children clapped their hands in delight, laughing and pointing at the beautiful movements. Merchants paused in their work, mesmerized by the coordination of the dancers and the guards. Even the older soldiers, who rarely showed emotion, allowed themselves to smile at the spectacle. Elias felt a wave of pride sweep through him. He realized that tonight, the parade was no longer just a ceremony. It was an experience, a story told through motion, sound, and light. As the dancers moved, the horsemen shifted their formation, guiding their animals through arches and circles with flawless precision. Their polished armor gleamed, reflecting the lantern light like mirrors, and the rhythmic sound of their hooves added a steady drumbeat to the performance. The young guards followed suit, adjusting their steps and movements to maintain perfect alignment. Elias could see their faces glowing with pride and determination. They were part of something extraordinary, something that would be remembered long after the lanterns were extinguished. Then, as if the moment could not become more magical, a sudden burst of light illuminated the far wall of the courtyard. Lanterns, hidden until now, flickered to life, casting a golden glow over every stone and every soldier. The young guards gasped, momentarily blinded by the brilliance, while the crowd erupted into cheers. Children laughed and pointed, their eyes shining with wonder. Merchants clapped enthusiastically, and the visiting diplomats exchanged surprised glances. Even the king leaned forward, clearly pleased by the unexpected display. The music swelled, rising to a crescendo that filled the entire courtyard. The guards shifted into a new formation, creating a series of intricate patterns that seemed almost impossible to execute. The horsemen weaved through them effortlessly, guided by their riders with subtle gestures. The dancers continued their elegant movements, twirling and spinning in perfect harmony with the soldiers and musicians. Elias felt a rush of pride and awe. Every detail, every movement, every note of music was part of a larger story, a story that everyone in the courtyard was now witnessing together. As the performance reached its peak, the king signaled for the final part of the ceremony to begin. A hush fell over the crowd, and even the guards seemed to pause for a moment, waiting for what would come next. Then, from the center of the courtyard, a group of performers carrying small torches began to move. They formed a circle around the young guards and the horsemen, their flames flickering in the evening breeze. The light from the torches reflected off the polished armor, creating a dazzling display of shimmering gold and silver. The crowd gasped again, unable to look away from the mesmerizing scene. Elias watched closely as the torches were carefully moved to create intricate shapes and patterns. The young guards followed the rhythm, stepping in perfect alignment with the dancers and horsemen. The courtyard was alive with light, movement, and music, and Elias could feel the energy in the air vibrating with excitement. The crowd clapped, cheered, and whispered in awe. Children laughed with delight, their eyes wide as they took in every detail. Even the visiting diplomats seemed spellbound, momentarily forgetting the formalities of their positions. The king raised his hand, signaling the guards and performers to form a final, breathtaking tableau. The horsemen arranged themselves in a semicircle, the guards created a precise line, and the dancers moved into a flowing pattern that completed the scene. The torches flickered in perfect synchronization, casting dramatic shadows across the courtyard walls. Elias felt a surge of pride. This was more than a parade, it was a masterpiece, a carefully orchestrated performance that combined discipline, beauty, and spectacle in a way that left everyone present in awe. The music reached its climax, the dancers twirling in perfect unison, the horsemen prancing gracefully, and the guards standing at attention with polished weapons and proud expressions. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing off the castle walls and filling the night with a sense of wonder. Children clapped and laughed, merchants cheered, and even the diplomats allowed themselves to show their admiration. Elias stood at the front, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Every soldier, every performer, every musician had contributed to this unforgettable moment. Then, as if to mark the grand finale, the torches were lifted high, casting a golden glow across the entire courtyard. The dancers twirled one last time, the horsemen pranced forward, and the guards raised their spears in unison. The music swelled one final time, reaching a dramatic peak that sent shivers through everyone watching. Elias felt a wave of pride and joy. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the unforgettable part of the parade that would be talked about for years. The crowd erupted into cheers, clapping and shouting in admiration. Children waved small flags, laughing and pointing at the guards and performers. Merchants clapped their hands and called out their delight, while the visiting diplomats exchanged impressed glances. Even the king, watching from his balcony, clapped slowly, clearly moved by the beauty and precision of the display. Elias felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that every guard had given their best, and that the audience was seeing the results of their hard work and dedication. As the applause continued, the performers and guards began to slowly return to their original positions. The horsemen guided their animals back into formation, the dancers moved gracefully to the edges of the courtyard, and the young guards stood tall, their faces glowing with pride. Elias walked among them, offering words of encouragement and praise. "You did well," he said quietly. "Remember this feeling. Tonight we created something that people will remember for a long time. Be proud of what you accomplished." The young soldiers smiled, some laughing quietly, others simply standing in awe at what they had just experienced. They had been nervous at the beginning of the evening, unsure if they could meet the high expectations set before them. Now, after participating in one of the most beautiful and impressive parades in the kingdom, they felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that would stay with them forever. The crowd continued to cheer, their excitement showing no signs of fading. Lanterns flickered, casting warm light over the courtyard, and the music slowly faded into a gentle melody. The young guards took a moment to catch their breath, standing in formation as they reflected on the extraordinary display they had been part of. Elias looked around, taking in the scene, the smiling faces of the spectators, the proud expressions of his soldiers, and the soft glow of the lanterns that illuminated the courtyard. In that quiet moment, Elias realized that the parade was more than a performance. It was a celebration of unity, discipline, and pride. It was a shared experience that brought together the guards, the performers, the king, and the people of the town. Every step, every movement, every note of music had contributed to a story that would be remembered for years to come. Finally, the king raised his hand one last time, signaling the end of the extraordinary performance. The crowd erupted into applause once more, cheering and shouting in admiration. The young guards stood at attention, exhausted but exhilarated, knowing that they had been part of something truly special. Elias allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. They had created a memory that would stay with everyone present forever, a story of beauty, precision, and pride. The courtyard was now filled with the soft glow of lanterns, their golden light reflecting off polished armor and the cobblestone ground. The music had faded, leaving only the whispers, laughter, and applause of the crowd. The parade, which had begun as a routine end-of-day ceremony, had grown into something extraordinary, a celebration of precision, discipline, and shared pride. Sergeant Elias stood at the front, watching as the young guards slowly relaxed, their stiff postures softening into smiles and quiet laughter. Children ran around the edges of the courtyard, still wide-eyed with amazement. Merchants clapped their hands and called out cheerful comments to one another, discussing the incredible performance they had just witnessed. Even the visiting diplomats, who had traveled from distant towns and cities, remained at the gates a while longer, murmuring among themselves about the remarkable coordination, grace, and dedication displayed by the guards and performers alike. Elias watched it all silently, feeling a deep sense of pride that went far beyond the performance itself. The young guards, who had begun the evening nervous and unsure, now stood with a confidence that radiated from them. Some laughed quietly with one another, their armor clinking as they shifted in place. Others simply gazed out at the crowd, taking in the applause and admiration, their expressions filled with awe. They had been part of something bigger than themselves, something that would be remembered for years. For many of them, this moment would be a memory to cherish for a lifetime. Elias walked slowly among the guards, placing a hand on shoulders here and there, nodding approvingly. "You did well tonight," he said quietly, his voice calm but warm. "Remember how it felt to be part of this. Remember the pride, the precision, and the teamwork. This is what it means to serve well, to create something that others will remember." The young soldiers nodded, some blushing slightly, others smiling broadly. The pride in their eyes was unmistakable. The king remained on the balcony for a while, watching the guards and the crowd with satisfaction. His subtle smile indicated approval, and when he finally raised his hand in a small gesture, the audience responded with one final, enthusiastic round of applause. Elias felt the atmosphere shift slightly. The formal part of the parade was over, but the excitement, joy, and pride lingered in the air like a warm, lingering breeze. The performers, including the dancers and horsemen, began to move toward the edges of the courtyard, giving the guards a small space to relax. The young soldiers allowed themselves to take a few deep breaths, their stiff postures relaxing further. The adrenaline of the performance was still in their bodies, but it was accompanied by a quiet satisfaction. They had faced the nerves, the pressure, and the demands of precision, and they had succeeded. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, conversations buzzed with excitement. Children ran back to their families, pointing out their favorite moments. Merchants discussed the most impressive movements, laughing and gesturing. Even the visiting diplomats were seen exchanging smiles and nods of admiration. Elias watched it all with quiet pride. He realized that this parade had accomplished something greater than he had expected. It was not just a display of discipline or skill. It was a story, shared between the guards, the performers, the king, and the people of the town. The young soldiers gathered together, some adjusting their armor, others speaking quietly among themselves. Elias stood back, observing their interactions. The bonds formed during the parade were evident. Trust, respect, and shared pride had strengthened in ways that went beyond training or rank. The experience had created a sense of unity that would carry forward into their daily duties, their friendships, and their dedication to the king's service. One of the youngest guards, barely 16, approached Elias nervously. "Sergeant," he said softly, "I've never felt anything like this before. It was amazing. I never thought I could do something like that." Elias smiled warmly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can do more than you imagine," he said. "Tonight proved that. Remember this feeling. Let it guide you in everything you do, not just in parades, but in every duty, every challenge, every step you take." The boy nodded, eyes wide, a mix of pride and wonder shining in his gaze. The king finally descended from his balcony, walking slowly through the courtyard. His presence added a quiet gravity to the moment. He approached the guards, nodding in acknowledgement of their efforts. "You have all performed admirably," he said, his voice clear and strong yet kind. "Tonight you have shown not only skill and discipline, but also pride, unity, and dedication. The people of the town will remember this parade, and they will remember you." "Well done." The guards stood at attention, bowing slightly, their faces filled with a mixture of pride, respect, and happiness. The crowd continued to cheer as the king walked past, acknowledging the performers and guards alike. Children waved excitedly, merchants called out their appreciation, and visitors smiled broadly. Elias could feel the pride radiating from his soldiers. They had done more than follow orders. They had created a memory, a story, a celebration that united the castle and the town. Every step, every movement, every detail had contributed to this shared moment of joy and admiration. As the evening wore on, the crowd gradually began to leave. Families returned to their homes, merchants closed their stalls, and the visiting diplomats made their way back to their accommodations. The castle staff worked quickly to extinguish some of the lanterns, leaving just enough light to allow the guards to return to their quarters safely. Elias walked among them, quietly ensuring that everyone was accounted for, that no one had been left behind, and that the young soldiers were handling the excitement without becoming overwhelmed. The young guards, though tired, walked with a renewed sense of pride and confidence. Their conversations buzzed with excitement, laughter, and reflections on the evening. "Did you see how the horsemen moved?" one said, still wide-eyed. "It was incredible," another replied, "and the dancers." "I've never seen anything like it." Elias smiled quietly, listening to their voices, proud that they had gained such a deep appreciation for the beauty, coordination, and teamwork that went into the parade. Finally, the courtyard grew quiet. The guards, performers, and staff returned to their daily routines, though the memory of the evening lingered in their minds. Elias stood at the center of the courtyard, gazing up at the fading glow of the lanterns and the night sky beyond the castle walls. He reflected on the parade, on the pride and joy he had witnessed, and on the young soldiers who had faced their nerves and performed flawlessly. This evening would remain with him for the rest of his life, a reminder of discipline, unity, and the power of shared experiences. As he began to walk back toward his quarters, Elias thought about the lessons learned from the parade. Discipline alone was not enough. Confidence, trust, and pride were equally important. Each soldier had played a role, no matter how small, in creating a performance that would be remembered. The shared effort, the teamwork, and the joy of performing together had made something greater than the sum of its parts. This was the essence of what it meant to serve with honor. Back in the barracks, the young soldiers gathered quietly, speaking softly among themselves. They recounted the moments that had impressed them most, the elegant maneuvers of the horsemen, the swirling dancers, the dazzling glow of the lanterns. Laughter and excitement filled the air, and Elias listened, satisfied. He had guided them through this experience, but tonight belonged to them. They had learned, they had grown, and they had created a memory that would last forever. Before retiring for the night, Elias stepped outside one last time. The courtyard was quiet now, the stones cool under his boots, the lanterns casting gentle shadows. He looked out toward the town, imagining the conversations, the laughter, and the shared stories that would follow. He smiled quietly, knowing that the king's guards had not only fulfilled their duty, but had also created a moment of joy, pride, and wonder for everyone who had witnessed the parade. The night air was calm, the stars twinkling above the castle walls. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction and pride. Tonight had been more than a parade. It had been a celebration of unity, discipline, and community. Every guard, every horse, every performer had contributed to something extraordinary. And as the young soldiers finally drifted to their beds, dreaming of the evening's excitement, Elias knew that this parade would be remembered, told, and cherished for many years to come. For the guards, the king, and the townspeople, the story of the parade was only beginning. Children would recount the sights and sounds with wide-eyed wonder. Merchants would speak of it for months, and visitors would tell tales of the beautiful and precise performance long after they had returned home. And for Sergeant Elias and his young soldiers, the memory of this evening, the pride, the excitement, and the joy would remain forever, a shining example of what could be achieved with discipline, unity, and shared effort. As the castle settled into the quiet of the night, the last lanterns flickered and went out, leaving only the stars above to witness the memory that had been created below. The king's guards had done more than perform a parade. They had inspired, amazed, and connected with every person present. And in the hearts of the young soldiers, a sense of pride and purpose had taken root, growing stronger with each shared moment of triumph. Tonight, the end-of-day parade was not just a routine ceremony. It was a story of courage, dedication, and unity, a story that would live in the memories of all who were present. And as Sergeant Elias finally retired to his quarters, he knew that this story, this extraordinary evening, would be retold for generations. A shining example of what could be achieved when people came together to create something truly remarkable.